So let's start with the first table. I'm very, very happy to have an international panel with experts in math, as we will see. And I would like to hand over to Brian Butterworth, Emeritus Professor of Cognitive Neuropsychology in the Institute of Cognitive Neuroscience at the University College in London. So Brian, the stage is yours. You have to switch on the microphone and we can start. The microphone. Okay, go.
Right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me to moderate this roundtable. During this roundtable, we want to share your experience as EdTech entrepreneurs, particularly with regard to maths in this session, about how digital learning resources can improve learning outcomes, especially in these uncertain times. We'll have 40 minutes altogether, and it will be structured as follows. 3-minute presentations from each participant, and I've been told I'm allowed to mute you if you go over the 3 minutes. Then there's 20 minutes of questions, mostly from me, and then 5 minutes of Q&A. So as Sven said, we've got an international panel, which makes pronunciation of their names rather difficult for me. First of all, we have Ramon Eixarch, who's the CEO and co-founder of Wiris, which is a solution suite for creating mathematical content. Its flagship product is the equation editor Matific, the leading editor for all major educational platforms. Then we have Lucio Manfredi, who's the Vice President, Business Development for Latin America at Matific, an award-winning math educational platform designed by pedagogical experts, implemented in more than 60 countries. And then we have Junaid Mubeen, not sure if I got that pronunciation correctly, Education Director at Whizz Education, the multi-award winning resource. He's a research mathematician turned educator. His research field is the relationship between education, innovation, and technology. Finally, we have Mohit Midha from Mangahigh. He's the CEO and co-founder, a games-based learning resource for K-10 maths and K-2 coding. In use in over 7,500 schools in several countries worldwide, and Mangahigh is available in English, Spanish, Portuguese, and German. So could I ask you, let's start with Ramon, what has been your experience in the last 3 months? What are the key lessons that you've learned for the future? And can you also say something about the target age or year group for your product? Ramon.
Okay, thank you. Hope everybody's hearing me. My English is worse than my Spanish, but I will try. I will make it my best. Any question I will maybe answer in Spanish. So basically, in order to fit to the time given, just to give some context to the audience, we have like a couple of tools, MathType, that's an equation editor to include equations in your digital content, and Wiris quizzes, that's a tool to create math questions that we originally, before COVID, we recommended it as a formative assessment tool, but now it became some kind of a grading tool. Okay, just because that all that in context of secondary education, basically. Okay, what we have seen here in the last 3 months is, I guess, like most of my colleagues, a big increase on the growth of the usage. Also, and not less important, a change in the usage. As I was saying, our tool for math assessment has received a lot of new incomers looking for a grading tool rather than a formative assessment tool, because there was this horizon of the grading at the end of the year. So grading was like the key vector for people looking for some of our tools. Okay, we have seen as well a different speed in different countries, like Italy being the faster for us. Our information, our colleagues, we have come out with the idea that the less mature usage of technology in Italy probably converted into a faster approach into digital tools because they really needed something because they had nothing somehow. So they moved in very fast. They also had the COVID earlier. So that was one of the things that made a big change. Also, a lot of difference, like a lot of movement to easy to get in platforms like Google Tools. Our tools for Google Tools have grown faster than other of our tools because basically Google is a very easy to use, low barrier tool. So it was perfect for newcomers to technology. So we have seen faster speed in Google Tools than in other of our tools. And also somehow Google is always ready for massive usage. And it's not the case sometimes with your own little installation of Moodle, for example, or any other platform. I am not blaming anyone, but just that Google was born to host thousands of millions, and your little Moodle installation maybe was not ready for app usage. So we've also seen that a search for security and performance, and that was probably what we have been focused mainly our efforts. So we have put a lot of effort in securing our tools so that they were working perfectly well for the new users, and that was our biggest emphasis and our biggest challenge as well. Beyond what, like, just very briefly, because I spent more than 3 minutes now, what happened in schools is obviously we were very concerned with the health situation like everybody was, but we have seen a total conversion from something that was underused to something that has been overused and vital to the school day life. So we've seen the biggest change ever. I'm over the 3 minutes, so let me stop here.
Thank you very much, Ramon. Okay, so can we have a brief presentation from Lucio now, please? Trying to answer those questions. What's been your experience in the last 3 months, and what are the key lessons learned for the future? And what's your target group for your product? Lucio.
Exactly. Thank you, Brian. Well, as you mentioned, Matific is a platform for an educational platform for mathematics. Our scope is students from kindergarten till 6th grade or 12 years old. It's a gamified platform. It means that all the content is developed in a game format. And to give you an idea where we are in more than 60 countries, translated in more than 40 languages, and all our content is aligned with the local curricula. Regarding our experience in those 3 months, well, of course, it was an unprecedented experience, like everything that happened after the COVID-19. We, as my colleagues here, as direct and concrete solutions for this problematic, start to work with ministers of education and schools around the world. And in our case, we developed several initiatives. For example, we are offering for free our platform to all the ministers of education and schools around the world. So after that, we start to work with many projects around the world in all the continents, in Latin America, Africa, Europe. So we've been really active on those 3 months. What we learned for the future, I want to mention that our view, for example, is that we need, as educational environment, we should be like more active and less reactive. I think that probably our educational ecosystem didn't progress fully aligned to the technology evolution. Probably in some countries, some education models are the same or didn't progress as much in the last 10, 20, 30 years, and the technology in those years evolved massively. So we need to propose, as tech companies, we have to propose and promote and support also this digital transformation. This is my view about the future, the near future with this situation.
Thank you very much. That was very, very concise. So Can we now go to Junaid, if I've got your pronunciation correct?
Yeah, it's close enough. Thank you. So Whizz Education has been around since 2004, an international education company. We partner with schools and governments all around the world to deliver individualized learning. And so we do that through a virtual tutoring platform called MathsWhiz. So as the name suggests, it focuses primarily on mathematics, ages 5 to 14, so primary and lower secondary. So there are many stories I can tell you about what we've seen unfold over the last few months. I can give you positive stories. I can tell you that there's been an uptake among parents. They're flocking to virtual tutoring as a source of stability and continuity for their children's learning during this period of disruption. And we can also see a spike in usage among many of our partner schools. And they fed back to us that virtual tutoring is something of a blessing for them because it's built for online delivery. The content is digitally native. It makes use of analytics and intelligent algorithms to truly personalize the experience for students. So they're the positives, but that's only one side of the coin, because we also work in very diverse areas. We work in marginalized communities in rural Kenya, in the DRC, in Mexico, even here in the UK and over in the US. And what we've observed is that there's a cruel duality for those communities. On the one hand, they are the ones that are most in need of online learning during this time, because it's the only access that those children have to any kind of structured education. And yet it's precisely those communities and those families that lack devices and connectivity to get online in the first place. And so there's a real danger that if we don't tackle this question, this barrier of access, that technology is going to become this great amplifier of inequality. Now, here in the UK, I will speak very candidly and say that I think there are some regards in which our government has stepped up. We've seen a monumental raft of measures with the economy, with the furloughing scheme. We've seen repurposing of the Excel Arena into a Nightingale Hospital. We haven't seen that same concerted effort for education. We haven't seen that resolve to ensure that every child has access to the internet to access online learning. So access is at the forefront of our minds, but so too is quality, because schools and parents are inundated with content options right now, literally thousands of them. And so they need evidence-based criteria against which to make very informed choices as to which of those options will maximize learning for their children. And I believe that there are and have been many viable options for many years. I think this panel is testimony to that. But I think part of the problem, as others have said, is that technology has really been squeezed into the margins of education by policymakers. And I have to say, this pandemic has caught the sector unaware. And now we suddenly have these unreasonable demands of many schools to adopt technology without any prior guidance. And their trust in these technologies has been eroded as a result. So I'll finish by saying, I do think, I'm an optimist ultimately. I do think there's an opportunity in this pandemic to build back better, to build resilience within our system, to support schools and teachers to embed technology as part of their delivery model, and not just as a coping mechanism for COVID, but so that when we emerge from this pandemic, technology becomes part of the status quo of education and of schooling, and access and quality are things that we can take for granted for all students. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Junaid. Finally, in this section, Mohit, can you tell us your experiences over the last, during the pandemic, this difficult time?
Sure, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Hi everyone. I agree with everything that's been said so far. So I am the CEO and co-founder of a company called Mangahigh. We're based out of the UK. Like a lot of our colleagues have said before, we are also in multiple countries, I think more than 60 countries. What we offer is a game-based solution to teaching maths or learning maths. And I think what we've learned in the last 90 days, I think we've just had a 3rd month anniversary of the lockdown on the 23rd of June. I think what we've learned in the last 90 days is not everything that we had planned for worked. There were lots of improvisations we had to do, a lot of innovations we had to do, and had to do at a very fast pace. Like the whole system of Mangahigh was designed to be online, differentiated education, so teachers could assign different things to different students, but the process of setting passwords and logins for every child required them to hand out a login to the students, because we don't take email addresses of the parents or even the students, and that had to be changed. But I think what was really positive for us is we've had this company belief about play, or about allowing children or encouraging children to have fun while they're learning, because we think if students are motivated to learn, like if you can tap into their intrinsic motivation to be lifelong learners, then the grades will follow, and then the results will follow. And we felt the need for engagement, motivation was appreciated by teachers far more than in or before February. So we had a massive amount of teachers. I think we had more than 10,000 schools sign up to Mangahigh in the last 3 months. We were not prepared to handle this volume of schools. Our technical guys did a lot of work to make sure our servers don't fall over. Our support people had to work around the clock. So it's been a hard time for everyone. I mean, especially, I think we have a lot of respect for teachers, and I think that respect has now gone through the roof. It's they are our heroes. I think there's a lot of recognition for doctors and nurses and what they do and how underappreciated they have been. But I think teachers are also in the same genre. They are superheroes and they get underappreciated. So I think one thing this pandemic has taught us is how important the teachers are to the society and for what we do. And I think it has also introduced the parent, I think, as was said earlier by Sven, into that triangle of student, teacher, and parent. So parent was previously sitting on the sidelines watching what was happening to their child's education, but they're now an active stakeholder. Like I've lived through it myself as a father, as an entrepreneur. So I've seen that there is so much going on with schools. And I'm glad and grateful that we had an opportunity to play our part. We made Mangahigh free during the pandemic, and I think teachers had really gratefully appreciated that.
Thank you very much. Could I ask, first question, something that Junaid raised, which is access. Now, not all kids, not all schools have equal access to the kinds of technologies that you're offering. What is your experience of, I mean, how widespread this access is, or how difficult it is for some people or for some schools? I know, so can I say, I know that in England, there's a policy to provide all students, particularly disadvantaged students, with their own device and also access to broadband. However, that's the policy. It's not been implemented very well, I'm afraid.
I can go first if that's okay, because I'm already on unmute. We at Mangahigh took that decision a long time ago. It wasn't a pandemic reaction to make our product fully responsive. So you don't need an expensive iPad to access Mangahigh. You could do it on a cell phone or smartphone. You do need some low bandwidth to be able to access it. And we've had classrooms, say in Maldives, with 2 meg connections who are able to use Mangahigh for all the students in a class. But more recently, we've had to be more innovative in areas where they don't have connectivity at all. So for example, in Peru, the Ministry of Education is using Mangahigh on the television. So they are using what was initially designed for a mobile phone screen or a tablet screen, but to express education through a TV, and that managed to get to a lot more people who would not have had access otherwise. And again, we supported the governments around the world. We're working with the federal government of Mexico, with Peru, and several other ministries.
Thank you very much. Would anybody else like to comment on their experience of access?
So we've had to confront this question of access for many years because of some of the contexts that we operate in. So in rural Kenya, for example, as part of our intervention, computer labs are purposefully built within these schools, and it's the only access that students have to the internet. It's the first time that they've seen a computer, and so when they go home, at most, their parents may have access to a feature phone. I think there's this exaggerated perception that that whole continent has leapfrogged a whole generation of technology, but it's simply not true in many of the communities that we work in. And so we're having to try to figure out workarounds. So as an example of that, we also partner with many of the international schools that are neighbors of these rural schools. They are very well resourced to be able to extend their equipment to some of those nearby schools. There's also a shift that we're trying to bring about at the policy level, but as you said, there's a real delta between implementation and execution. Bringing the conversation back home to the UK, I think that policy has only been mandated for like year 10s and I think early childhood, and even then, I think something like 2/3 of school children in the UK are not currently accessing online learning, combined with the fact that only 9% of them are actually going into school. So whatever way you do the arithmetic, it doesn't bode well for the majority of students. And I will say that it's a double whammy at the moment, because we're entering the extended summer period, and everyone knows about this phenomenon of summer learning loss. that tends to exacerbate those inequalities, because again, it's the students that are most in need of supplemental support during those months that don't have access to online learning. So the problem is really very acute and kind of manifests in slightly different ways depending on where we are.
Thank you. Lucio.
Yes, exactly. Well, I fully agree with Mohit and Junaid. I think in several regions like Africa and South America, we have those problems. One thing that I want to mention and agree with Mohit is that, for example, the teachers have a really important role in this. Actually, we see that even if in some countries there are an important number of teachers that are not digital natives, with the actual platforms, they are that are really intuitive. They are really engaged with those platforms. Of course, we are providing training to the teachers via webinars, so they can clarify every doubt that they may have in all the process, in all the adaptation process. But this is something that the teachers are working really hard in order to participate and to implement this kind of platforms. And related with the lack of connectivity, that is a real problem in Latin America or in Africa. I think we are progressing in handle it. For example, in Matific, we have an app, so you can access through your smartphone or through a tablet, and you don't need any kind of connection, not even internet or data, to play all the games, all the activities, or all the episodes. So it's a really important tool that the teachers and the students have now, and it helps a lot to solve these kind of issues that we are facing right now.
Thank you. Ramon.
Okay. Being the last is always the worst position for this kind of things, but I would say when Junaid mentioned this equality problem, I think that from a technology point of view, I have a little to say. We all work on that. I would say that except like beyond Africa or Latin America, we could also look into Spanish regions with, let's say, rural areas in Spain where connectivity is not as good as you can imagine. And then maybe the situation is different at home because you have your own connection and you want to connect to Netflix. So you're going to have a decent bandwidth. But all companies, and we work with many because we work with schools, but we work with a lot of companies. Most companies have in place plans or versions like Matific or others to run all those programs offline. But I think that the biggest challenge here is probably on the teachers' perception, because in many of the webinars that we've been taking these days, we hear a lot of teachers really concerned about what do they have to do to avoid some students being left behind, because they don't want to build a strategy that might be powerful, that they may see the value proposition that they are giving to their students, but if they are just leaving 2 out of 40 behind, they're going to stop that strategy because they don't want to leave anyone behind. And that's reasonable, and that's what it has to be, because the school is one of our, like, the basis for equality in society, as we understand it in this part of the world, probably. So it's very, very important to guarantee that your student is going to be there. I would say that the COVID phase has been one phase that hopefully is almost finished. I mean, we learned a lot of lessons from a health perspective on COVID, and probably September won't be like March. So we will, I understand that we will be facing multiple scenarios, and maybe those with a higher, like a bigger connectivity problem will be the ones going to school so they can keep the pace. And we may be able, if we need to balance not everybody being in school, we can bring those ones at higher risk into the physical school and keep at home those that can keep up and attend the classes online, if we have to keep some groups at home and some groups out. But this is, for me, beyond technology, the real thing that is bothering teachers is being able to offer equality opportunities to all their students.
One of the things that came up was particularly, I think something Junaid said, that that policymakers have rather, certainly in my country, have actually rather ignored technological solutions to educational progress. So I'm just wondering whether it's your experience over the last couple of months, 2 or 3 months, that schools themselves are likely to want to incorporate EdTech solutions into their classroom when the lockdowns are over, when the pandemic has been resolved.
So I think there is an increasing realization and an embrace among teachers that technology will have to become part of the new normal, whatever the new normal is. And so there's various terms being bandied about, like blended learning, the idea that some of the instruction will happen online, some of it will happen offline, and hopefully the two will complement quite nicely. And so I think there's a recognition that there's an inevitable role that technology now has to play in mainstream education. And that recognition hasn't been there before. Prior to COVID, the mainstream belief was that you can do it all with textbooks and written assessments. Having said that, as I mentioned, a lot of trust has been eroded, not just in the last few months as schools have been sent mixed messages as to how to adopt technology, but I would say over the past 100 years, quite often it's a technology-led approach where a shiny new innovation comes along and it's just thrust upon teachers. And this is true of radio, television, even some of these very same personalized learning technologies from many years ago. They're often cast in as a silver bullet, and teachers, I think, are quite right to be skeptical. And now, as I mentioned, we're living in an era of innovation and recombination where it's a lot easier now to just create and recreate variants of these tools. So even schools and teachers who have the intention to embed technology quite often don't know where to start. So I think it's important to have an evidence-informed approach to be able to adapt that to the context of each individual school. And so I think policy, though, needs to adapt too. I think there are a lot of archaic assumptions around schooling that are going to have to change, exams being one of them. They've already been disrupted this year. And I would hope that this can spell the end of what has been an era of high-stakes standardized testing. And if that then dovetails with the emergence of formative-based assessment tools that technology enables, then that can be one way in which I think we build back better that I think all teachers would welcome.
Thanks very much. Mohit, I mean, among the learners who have difficult access to your products, either because it's a low bandwidth or they have to see it on TV, do you get the impression from teachers that they're going to want to continue to do this even under these difficult circumstances when the pandemic has been resolved?
I think it's an interesting question. I have spoken to a few teachers, so I feel informed to answer this question well. I think it has really depended on the experience the teachers have had, because even where they have had bandwidth doesn't mean using EdTech has been a positive experience, because not all that glitters is gold. So they've had to pick technologies in matter of no time. I think, as Junaid said, it's very important to be more evidence-led, but there was no time for teachers to evaluate everything that's out there and pick the best things. And they had to go with whatever they could. The government, like you said, was a bit late to the party, like there was no funding provided. I mean, Mangahigh was in a lucky position that we could make it free and we could get into a lot of schools to help them out. But teachers ended up finding what's free out there. Not what's been made free for now, but what's free out there, and that's not necessarily always high quality. Yeah. So I think teachers have had mixed experiences. So that's not a true reflection on whether or not all of them will carry on. I think from the ones who have had a good experience, they've seen the side of EdTech where they can do stuff that they could not do before. They can differentiate every single child. Like, for example, on Mangahigh, teachers can assign different things to different students, and then AI will come along and figure out what's the next best thing for the child to learn based on the gaps they might have in their learning. And that's something that teachers have really appreciated, being able to see a whole class report in just a click of a button, not having to mark things. Teachers have appreciated all that time saved in marking. Obviously, there have been setup issues, like trying to understand how Google Classroom works and how do I use an extra resource on top. There have been challenges. I have no doubt some teachers would like to or can't wait to go back to their old ways of doing things, but there will be a large portion who would want to stick with the new normal. And I agree with my colleagues before, with Junaid and Ramon, who said like the technology has a higher perceived value for teachers now. I think it's here to stay. It's no longer a nice to have. I feel it's going to play a more pivotal role in education going forward.
So, Lucio, so what's been your experience? So, for example, in Argentina, they have private schools and state schools, and the only ones I've visited have been private schools, which are very well resourced and equipped. But I don't know whether in the state schools they're also well equipped enough to take the kinds of products that you're offering.
Yes, exactly. There is a huge difference there. I think that the most important role was developed by the teachers. They have to be adapted to the actual situation. They don't have any other option. Mm-hmm. But even if they start in the beginning with without any technological solution, they are starting to prove on their own that the adaptation is not a big deal. They are seeing that they save a lot of time, a lot of work using different platforms, and they can invest that time in other educational activities for the students. They are seeing also that the students are more engaged and more motivated using platforms. They can see the results because they can see through the reports online. They can see the result of their students. So I think that we are getting more conscious about the impact that the technology have in the day-to-day life in schools, and the policy or the government has to take an important role there and keep developing those technology and those solutions for the education.
Thank you very much. Can I just ask you about whether any of you have done any research on the effectiveness of your products? I mean, do some of your products work better than others? How do you measure the effectiveness of your products compared to, say, traditional methods or to other products? So can I start with Ramon on this one?
Okay, perfect. Our situation is quite different from others. So we are basically like partners to others. So we integrate our tools into third parties. So we typically don't have an analysis of our tool separated from others. So we integrate in Moodle, we integrate in places. So we know it works. Otherwise people wouldn't be using it, of course. But the strict evaluation of this has to be done as part of a global scenario. Like, is Moodle working for you? If in that context, is the assessment engine working for you? And in general, we do have examples. We have some examples. Let me mention the Open University of Catalonia at some point implemented this. It was a course that you can consider higher secondary. It was like a first year course. They went from like they were somehow doubling the success of that course, because they basically converted kind of like very textbook course into a series of assessments that were in place, more interactive, more flexible, more adapted to the individual users, because they were adapting to their own level. So students were doing it like in that case there were and it's interesting in this COVID situation, when you go with adults in online learning, they typically stop doing the course because they are bored, they don't know how to proceed, and they leave a course. And there was a substantial reduction in the people leaving the course and people and in the substantial increase on the people finishing that course. So I would say that was the case that we can have more data or we can share here. But in general, we are just part of a third-party tool.
Can I turn to Lucio now? I know that when I looked at your website, there was a report from an Israeli institute on the effectiveness of your product. I mean, from 2016. I just wondered if there'd been any peer-reviewed research with the appropriate controls.
Yes, exactly, absolutely. With every implementation that we did, or every pilot that we did, that we do around the world, we do several measures that we consider. And of course, we participate with some universities around the world to certify the results that we are achieving. We always do a pre and post test data to understand which was the situation in the beginning and which are the results that we get. Plus to that, we add a lot of surveys to teachers and students to understand what they are feeling with the solution and how it performs. We've been doing several research with universities from United States, Israel, and Australia. We are an Australian company, so we participate with several universities from Australia, and we have an indicator that for the evaluation of the performance, and we can guarantee a 34% of increase in the result of the student, which is a magnificent result, plus to all the other things that they generate engaging commitment from the student. But we participate with a lot of private institutes or public universities to certify the result. And we also do pilots in some regions that it's a really good option for the countries or for the ministers of education or schools, because in the pilot you can check the local evidence that you get previous to define an implementation. So it's a really good option right now to push or to invite all the schools or the ministers of education in participating in this kind of solution implementations.
Okay, thanks very much. I just want very briefly to ask you about, all of you, about the main organ of learning, namely the brain. I'm just wondering how much any of your products are informed by what we know about how the brain learns. I ask this question because I'm a neuroscientist, that's my trade. So Junaid, can we start with you on that one?
So I think quite often products are designed, they have certain design principles built in, and then you look at the research and you try desperately to tie those threads together. So it would be frankly disingenuous to suggest that Matific was designed, that it was born out of neuroscientific principles. And indeed many of those principles, as I understand, are actually very recent, whereas Matific was created some 15, 16 years ago. But there are a couple of core principles in there. We're trying to simulate the behavior of a human tutor. And so this goes back to the efficacy of human tutoring as validated by the likes of Bloom's 2 Sigma study, trying to really understand what it means to provide targeted feedback and dedicated one-to-one attention. And so I think we're finding that there is a lot of research that's now been getting a lot of traction, particularly research around mindset, research around neuroplasticity, that just seems to align quite nicely with this intuitive approach that Matific took all along. Now that obviously we're innovating and iterating around the product, we're a lot more conscious of trying to build those things into the design process so that it's not just a happy accident.
Good, thank you. Mohit, can we have the last comments from you, please, about the brain, if you have anything to say about that?
Sure. I think I started Mangahigh with a guy who made King.com, which is the company behind Candy Crush. So as you know, Candy Crush became really, really popular. And I think the game mechanics that games have in general, like know quite well how to engage the player. I think they sort of work well with the generation of or participants of the students that we're working with. But more recently, we are now working with a research organization in the US, especially around this piece that you mentioned. Our head of content is also doing a PhD in neuroscience, and his area of specialization is around positive nudges or behavioral reactions to that. So we are implementing, I think, what's called mindfulness breaks, and also implementing the growth mindset philosophy into the product throughout. So for instance, we've had to, when we started with a game-based approach, there was this whole extrinsic pressure of a clock or a timer to make the game more fun. But we've learned since then, like, timer and learning maths don't go well together, even though it might be better for a gamification point of view. But from an overall learning point of view, we've turned those timers off by default. We encourage students after, I think the research says after they've had to go 4 times, then taking a little mindfulness break actually helps their overall productivity. So we building those, we sort of using the latest research and building those into our product. So we are catching up with the new research, but like Junaid, our product has sort of preceded some of this new research that has come out in the last 5 or 7 years. But we are big fans of growth mindset, and we're trying to implement that into our product as much as we can.
So growth mindset, that's not exactly neuroscience though, is it?
It's
Psychology.
It's kind of linked, right? So it depends on, say, if a student tries something really hard and you give them a right nudge, and what reaction it has in their brain, what they think about themselves, about their math ability, and then try to go again. We think it's linked, but I'd love to pick your brains, because I know you've got sort of a lot of research in dyscalculia and students with learning disabilities. That's another grant that we're working with Nesta on to make our product work for students with special needs. But I feel like growth mindset nudges help you not lose motivation, and that's quite important to be a persistence is quite important to learn mathematics.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I didn't get onto dyscalculia, which is what I really wanted to get onto, but I don't know. It's now time for questions and answers.
Exactly. So let me step in. Maybe we can follow up on that question and path of brain science at a different occasion. I would like to step in with a couple of questions. We have 5 minutes. Maybe for Junaid, one question: what experience do you have with pupils with learning disabilities? How does your product help them?
So if you spend 5 minutes on matters, the visual nature of the representations will strike you as being very dynamic. As I said before, it's digitally native. So one of the co-founders of Whizz was actually the pioneer of children's pop-up books. So that was the kind of creative vision that was then combined with pedagogical principles. And so what we found is that because we were appealing a lot to visual representation, students that had traditionally struggled with mathematics and had come up against what's often termed as a symbol barrier, that they just couldn't grasp fractions in terms of numerators or denominators, or when they encountered the very same concepts on MathsWhiz and were now presented with more visual and dynamic and interactive representations, they found that they were actually able to overcome those conceptual blockages. Now, it would be disingenuous to suggest that MathsWhiz caters to all students of all needs. It does make certain assumptions on their learning dispositions, but by and large, it's proven to be a very inclusive product. We try to remove as many barriers as possible. I'll give you a live example that we're working on at the moment. We have a topic called rapid recall. It has this good intention of trying to embed fluency and trying to get students to recall certain maths facts fluently. On the other hand, it seems to be reinforcing that barrier for a number of students, and we're questioning whether speed is really an acceptable notion of fluency. So we're constantly revising those assumptions based on the data and feedback that's coming out.
Perfect. Lucio, do you want to go on the same question?
Yeah, exactly.
Quickly,
Absolutely.
1 minute.
Exactly. Well, in Matific, for example, with our platform, it's an adaptive platform. It means that if any student have any problem, any issue, the platform automatically or with the algorithm will assign activities related with their capacities. If they are a little bit slow with one issue, the platform will do some activities or will assign some activities so the children can re-understand the problem and solve all the exercises. Also, the teacher have the possibility to create subgroups. So if a group of students are more advanced, the teacher can assign more challenge activities. And in the other case, if a group of students are or need some reinforced to be adapted with the rest of the group, they don't have the problem to do that.
Perfect. So since time is running out, we will share on our Facebook page later the link to all of your products. So if anybody's interested, you should find the information about all the products we have been discussing tonight. I would like to finish with one question for everybody, just a 10-second answer. There was a question if your product can be used by individual professors in a school, or if it's necessary that the whole school signs up. Just 10-second, everybody.
I can start. You can use it individually in Word, Google Docs, and many other places.
With Mangahigh, you can use it for one student, one class, the whole school or the whole district or the whole country.
The same for Matific. The teacher can use it for themselves, and also the student with Matific Academy, the parent of the student can create a user for the student.
Same for MathsWiz, but I guarantee you once half the school is on it, the other half will be crying out for it.
Perfect. Wonderful. So thank you very much, Ramon, Lucio, Mohit, Junaid, and Brian for joining us tonight for this very, very interesting discussion. And